Man, how did I become a sexual abolitionist? The how? Well, I mean, I grew up having more questions than answers. I grew up brought up by baby boomers, which was the silent generation that was taught that you don't question things, that this is just how life is. I grew up with a great grandmother that taught me how to pepper spray a little boy's penis. I grew up with a gigolo father. I grew up with a Southern conservative mother. My mother was one of the first women to have a child and not be married. So I had all these questions. Who was I? You know, was I a lady? Was I freaky? Was I the marrying type? Who was I? Who was I going to be with the combination of these types of parents and family members bringing me up? And, you know, growing up in an urban city, dealing with so many urban city challenges, and I'm looking, and this was at the time, you know, they talked about black on black crime, and I was like, but what about black on black love? Where's the black on black love? And seeing and witnessing, experiencing 4 of my friends killed as I was graduating from high school, losing a lover, partner, and friend in my 20s that was murdered. Again, I had these questions about black love. And I started writing a lot of erotic poetry because I was deeply infatuated with black love. And as my career blossomed in erotic poetry, which was very taboo back at that time in the 90s, you know, girls didn't really talk about the sex. And I was talking about it, but in a way that people honored, and I felt that honor. And my career advanced in spoken word, and I moved to New York, and I'm also working at the first AIDS hospice of New York, and I'm working on my erotic poetry career, and I'm being featured on HBO. And I'm also now working at a domestic violence shelter program. And I don't know, like my life really actually authentically revolved around sex. And then I ended up at the Museum of Sex as one of the first employees of the Museum of Sex in New York City. And I noticed someone taking notes at the Museum of Sex. And I was like, who's taking notes at a museum of sex? And when she told me about her graduate studies in human sexuality, I just could not believe that there was a field, there was an actual field that focused and studied sex. But it wasn't just sex, it was sexuality. And I became a student of human sexuality. And then I started studying globally around the world, and I was just like, you know, and I'm learning about also, as I studied around the world, about the slave trade in all of these different spaces, the slave trade in Peru, the slave trade in Brazil, the slave trade in Africa. And I'm just like, man, imagine if people not only were emancipated physically from the physical shackles, but also the social emotional shackles of life. And that's where I wanted to be. I'm very clear, and I have this understanding that as a society, we have very limited emotional literacy. And I'm looking at all of these other spaces globally that are more advanced than us in America when it comes to emotional literacy. And so I was like, this is it. It dawned on me. I had an epiphany studying in Cuba. They have a center of sex, a center of sexuality. And it dawned on me like, yeah, this is what I'm destined to do. I am destined to become a sexual abolitionist. I'm destined to do this work. I'm destined to help people emancipate themselves from the trauma, from the childhood sexual violence, from the adult sexual violence, from human trafficking, from gender identity. Like, it's all okay. And the fact that we've all been intentionally misinformed about these things, I knew that I had a social responsibility, that I had a civic responsibility to help people get free. And so now I'm thankful, that I had a great grandmother that helped me pepper spray this little boy that kept sticking out his penis at me. And I'm grateful that, my father taught me the rules of dating while he was a gigolo. And I'm grateful that my mother was a conservative because she taught me how to set boundaries, and that all these different people in my lives with their own sexual identities helped me procure my own sexual identity as an individual, as myself. And I want to make sure that other people are doing this in a healthy way, and a sex positive way, in a non-toxic way. Because we can have a sex positive life, we can have a sex positive society, and imagine where we would be, where there were more people loving each other and giving a fuck rather than just fucking. So this is my work.